Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AskIoT video series from IoT for All, the #1 publication and resource for the Internet of Things. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon, and on today's episode, we have Benjamin Thomas, the CEO of EDJX. They are a company that has an intelligent edge operating system and computing platform that makes it easy to write, deploy, and execute applications using serverless computing to increase responsiveness and security. So we're going to talk a lot about serverless edge computing, what it means, the role it plays in the space, the benefit it provides for the industry. We talk a little bit about the EDJX platform as well, and kind of how it compares to what's in the industry and what you need to be thinking about when looking into these types of technologies to adopt. We talk about the future of edge computing and the role it's playing to kind of further advance IoT capabilities, use cases, adoption, you name it. And then we wrap up talking about kind of the things EDJX has going forward regarding some events they're going to be at, some hackathons they're going to be at. If you're going to be at any of the events, I highly recommend you reach out to them, check them out when you are at these events. Very cool stuff going on, very cutting edge, exciting company to kind of pay attention to. So I do ask, though, if you are watching this video on YouTube, to please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. But other than that, I hope you enjoy this episode of the Ask IoT series. Welcome, Benjamin. Thanks for taking time to chat with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Been looking forward to this conversation. Wanted to kick it off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself and your background, and then a little information about the company.
Sure, Ryan. Thank you. My name is Benjamin Thomas, and I'm the CEO of EDJX. And my career started as an engineer at a NASA facility working for Lockheed, and then I went on to work with Accenture for a few years, and then started and sold a couple companies. So I'm really excited to be part of EDJX.
Awesome. And tell us a little bit more about the company and what you all do, the role you play in the space. And I'd also love to hear, if you wouldn't mind, is what brought you here? Like, it's you coming in recently as CEO. What kind of brought you here? What's exciting about what's going on at the company?
Thank you, Ryan. It's really exciting to be the CEO of EDJX. EDJX is a startup, and but even though it's a new business, the vision of EDJX and how we've been able to see the future of computing and potentially lead it is really
Yep.
amazing. And so that's what attracted me. Also, the passion of the team. We all know we're working on something hugely important for the future of computing. And so I really don't want to change that. I just want to accelerate what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so, one example of acceleration was just opening up our platform to developers and more joining every week. But big picture, the Internet of Things is advancing, I think, faster than people thought. Some
Right.
might even call it an explosion. Trillion devices. We've heard that fact by 2030, and this is going to put tremendous pressure on the cloud and require different architecture. And so I recognize that EDJX has really built this, and because of this, I expect us to lead the next wave of computing by enabling some use cases that have never been done before.
That's fantastic. Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff sounds like it's happening over at the company. And I'm very glad you're able to take the time to do this, because the topic we're going to talk about today is the role of serverless edge computing in IoT. And I think it's very relevant now. People have been talking about it. I think there are a lot of people who are still trying to understand exactly what it is and the role it plays, the benefits, and so forth. So I wanted to kick this conversation off. If you could start off by just defining what it means to be kind of serverless, and then as it relates to serverless edge computing in IoT, what role does it really play? What's the value, the benefits, and how should people be thinking about it?
Well, Ryan, you and I go to some of the same conferences, and
Sure.
when you go to an IoT conference, everybody's talking about, using a serverless platform to roll out their next project. And it makes sense when you think about it. Most of the IoT projects fail not because of the engineering of the endpoint, but because of the DevOps stack. And so serverless takes away a lot of that risk. Serverless applications are a collection of functions that are each responsible for a single task, and they respond to user actions or network requests. And so with serverless, instead of running an entire application from one's own server or their own virtual machine, for instance, it's broken down into smaller functions that a platform runs. And so each function is specific to what it does. It's faster and easier to create these functions, test, and even change down the road. And so serverless computing really provides the freedom from building and maintaining servers, and also reduce the risk, as the serverless platform providers have dedicated systems and processes in place to manage security, data integrity, And so as demand grows, we can scale our infrastructure. And it's very cost effective too, because users are really only paying for what they use.
Right. And so tell us a little bit more about your all's platform. And because I know there are a lot of companies out there who play in this space, focus on edge computing, and I'm just curious how platforms kind of compare to one another and what sets different ones apart. What sets the EDJX platform apart, just so I guess our audience can better understand what the difference really is when they're out there kind of searching for um, an edge platform to use for a solution or adopt in some capacity.
No, that's a great question. I mean, there are a number of serverless platforms on the market today. Most of them were built using centralized architecture, using traditional cloud tools, and they're really designed for cozy, protected data centers. And
Okay.
I think a lot of the developers on these platforms just assumed that down the road, everything would stay centralized. Everything would sort of be a big behemoth data center, that was going to work in the future. But the edge is a messy place, and you have to badge out of the data center to really discover the edge. And
Great.
so in the future, when you have hundreds of billions of devices, compute and storage will need to move out to the edge and even the far edge. The sheer amount of data and processing will require hyperlocal compute, storage, just to process the data being generated. And so the cloud is really not a great place for that. It can't keep up. And so what you're going to see, Ryan, is these micro data centers at the far edge. That's just going to be necessary to keep up. And this is really where EDJX comes in, with our own operating system. And so at EDJX, we believe we solved this problem with a proprietary decentralized architecture, a self-healing mesh network that serves up compute and storage and is able to live on the edge, that allows enterprises to quickly and efficiently deploy to the edge at lower cost and complexity. And also because we are right at home at what we call the far edge, and that could be rooftops, that could be
Mm,
cell phone towers, developers can actually connect their sensors directly to our edge blocks for virtual real-time signal processing, something that you can't do or wouldn't want to do in a data center.
sure.
But to get to the heart of the question, the key architectural difference in our solution is it's peer-to-peer
Mm,
versus centralized. It's built to live at the edge in what we call the far edge. And so our platform automatically chooses the closest node to the end user. It's event driven, it's serverless. And so we believe infrastructure needs to be smart enough to look at an event and then provision what needs to be provisioned at literally the operating system layer. And so
right.
our platform does this automatically for the developer. So the developer can focus on solving, building, and scaling really interesting things.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things I thought were interesting there. You talked about the speed, you talked about the reduction in cost and just kind of how this is going to power solutions going forward. And I'd love it if you could expand a little bit more on kind of how being serverless at the edge will help drive um, not just the computing piece of it, but IoT in general forward. What it's going to enable, and what I mean by that is, it seems to me that this kind of technology and capabilities is going to enable solutions and use cases to exist that may not have been able to be exist for one reason or another, whether it's cost, whether it's computing power, whether it's the speed in which data is transferred. So I'm just curious from your perspective, how this really lends itself to helping carry the industry forward and increase adoption, or at least the ability for companies to adopt due to use cases becoming more viable than they probably were before.
That's a great question, Ryan. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, not all serverless platforms are built for the edge.
Right.
The vast majority of IoT happens at the edge, right? So when you think of Internet of Things, you're really talking about smart meters, you're talking about drones, you're talking about driverless cars. And so, developers really need to think about whether the platform they're choosing can take them all the way to the edge or even the far edge. For instance, right now we're working with a drone company that needs an array of sensors along its flight path. And these sensors can be attached directly to our edge blocks, which also delivers the same serverless functions and stores data. And so we believe that's an important distinction in the marketplace.
Mm.
When you think about if the serverless is delivered strictly in a data center, that wouldn't work for that particular use case because this particular customer needs, edge blocks along its whole flight path so that when they hand off from one pilot to the next, or in the next version, if it's a flight controller, there needs to be continuity along the way. And so if you're just relying on a data center, that's not going to necessarily be able to fulfill that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always been an interesting conversation over the last, I'd say, in podcast and video content years for me, it's probably the last 50 to 60 episodes and interviews that I've done. It seems like this is becoming more of a popular topic and a thing that really is leading the industry forward. And it sounds like from your all's perspective, there's a lot of things to be optimistic about when it comes to this kind of technology. I did want to ask, when it comes to the adoption of a technology like this and a platform like this, um, how do you approach that, and how should developers be approaching that? And I guess a question prior to that even is, are developers the right ones that kind of lead that adoption within an organization? If so, what is it that makes that kind of easier for them to do when it comes to bringing this technology into either an existing solution or potentially one that they're in the process of developing?
Well, ultimately, I think corporations are certainly giving developers more license as to picking the right technology, but
Yeah,
ultimately it does come down to cost.
sure.
So, for instance, if I'm a developer thinking about trying to build out a new application, and I start doing the math on, okay, let's just say traditional cloud tools. So I need virtual machines, all over a city. Then I have to manage my licensing, my hardware, my Kubernetes, all the different applications that go into making that work. That's going to cost X, right? But if I can take advantage of a platform like EDJX, and maybe I really only need 20% of a compute node, I'm going to spend less money. And so when we start talking to developers about their next gen application, it's really about cost, and it's
Mm,
also about speed. So, I mean, the longer it takes to get an IoT application up and running, the more it costs. And so we had a hackathon early this summer just with our own team, and folks were able to build applications in 3 days that really did amazing things.
right.
And so it's really, a what platform does the job, and b, how much does it cost.
Sure.
And we feel like we check those boxes. I mean, there's also some things that we can do that I don't, to my knowledge, that no one else can do. For instance, we're working with a client right now that needs sub 5 millisecond response directly from a sensor at the far edge. And so that's really fast, right? So the compute has to be right there. I mean,
Mm,
in fact, they really like to get down to 1 millisecond. And so, how do you get that done with today's technology? Well, it's difficult if the computer that is serving up the application is not just right there by the sensor.
100%.
So, one of the things we've been responding to from the market is really, what kind of hardware can I put up there that I can hook my sensor directly to? And we're having a lot of fun with that. But when we go to conferences, that's what people want to talk about.
Absolutely. Let me ask, have you seen any industries or particular use cases kind of lead the way when it comes to adoption of the serverless edge platforms and that are out there, and or I guess that are benefiting the most from this technology and moving from how things were done before versus more of the edge computing and emphasis being put on there?
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot of adoption for serverless in general.
Okay.
I mean, when I think of like the Roomba vacuum company, I mean, their entire dev stack is on serverless. T-Mobile has announced we're a serverless first for new services. Thomson Reuters is using serverless for data collection. But a lot of the past, a lot of these, a lot of those use cases don't require extremely low latency. And
Mm,
so I would say the next generation, when you start talking about drones and
yep.
flying
Sure.
things and moving things, that's really when you start to say, okay, we have the convenience of serverless, but what about the latency
Right.
itself? And that's where we're
Right.
seeing a lot of kind of that next gen, drone companies, delivery of packages via drones. Big one is driverless cars, right? I mean, if you're trying to, send a truck down the highway,
Yeah.
the further it gets away from the data center, the
Yeah.
less you can rely on that data center from a latency
Sure.
perspective. And
Sure.
so we're seeing a lot of that coming down the pike. But in the past, a lot of the serverless implementations have really been, more of a convenience thing, a cost thing, but didn't require the ultra low latency we're seeing with the future of IoT.
I do in a second. I wanted to wrap up and ask you a couple like final questions, but before we do that, I wanted to ask how, and this just kind of came up as a thought, how are AI and kind of ML technologies playing into kind of the edge and the far edge, and as it comes to the computing power and the capabilities and what that's enabling?
Well, a lot of the AI and machine learning algorithms are still pretty much containerized, right?
Okay,
So you see kind of hybrid situations where somebody needs the AI engine in a container sitting next to, for instance, a serverless edge container.
sure, sure,
And so, but we're seeing some, you know, we're seeing some, I'd say, work toward making some of these tools be, built on a serverless platform. Not a lot, but it's starting to happen. We're getting some inquiries about that.
gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So as we wrap up here, I wanted to ask what are some of the big plans kind of coming out of EdGec? What are you really focused on and seeing happen in the market that is a big focus of yours kind of as we continue out through the rest of this year and into 2023?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we've opened up our platform to developers. So
Okay.
our priority right now is to really listen carefully to the feedback we're getting from the developers on our platform as we grow that developer base.
Hmm.
And we're also, encouraging developers to come and build and run with us. We do plan to be at, two upcoming conferences: ITS World Congress, which is in late September, and Edge Computing World. And during
Okay.
that conference, we'll be announcing some really, really cool new features on our platform. So we hope to be out there and announce those things, and we're really excited about it.
And you all have a hackathon coming up, correct? Is that associated with the events or is that separate?
Yes, at Edge Computing World, we're going to have a hackathon with a lot of great,
Okay.
cool prizes. And
Cool.
like I mentioned earlier, we had a hackathon internally a few weeks ago, and they built some amazing things in 3 days. So I'm super excited as we open up, have a public hackathon
Yeah.
at Edge Computing World. What's going to come out of it?
Well,
Who
we'll
knows?
have
We
to have
might
you.
even give a life size. I'm not sure. One of the prizes might even be a life size Sasquatch.
We'll have to have you back on after the hackathon because I'm always curious to hear what comes out of those with the creativity and the speed of execution there. So in one of our further future discussions, we'll have to bring up kind of what was done there and some of the exciting stuff you saw. Um, so, last thing I want to ask you before I let you go here, for our audience out there who's watching this and learning about all these conversations that we're having and things we're talking about, what's the best way that they can follow up if they have questions, want to learn more, want to kind of dive into more about what EdgeX is doing, potentially meet up with you all at the events, that kind of thing? What's the best way they can kind of stay in touch?
Well, edgex.io is our website, and
Perfect.
there's a link right on the front page where developers can log right in and create an account. We're not charging for those accounts right now, so
Okay.
developers can build whatever they like for at no charge. So our website's great, but we hope to please come see us at ITS World or Edge Computing. We'll be there, and we are excited to get out there and show people what we built.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad events are coming back much pretty strongly. As we kind of continue to plan our event schedule, I hope we're able to run into each other at some of these events and see all the exciting stuff you have going on. So Benjamin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and kind of help educate our audience on a very, very popular topic that's going on in the space right now, and it's very exciting to hear all the stuff that you have going on over there. And look forward to getting more content out to our audience around serverless edge computing and the value it provides to the IoT industry.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everyone, thanks again for watching that episode of the Ask IoT video series. I hope you found a lot of value in it. If you did, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps others find it and make sure that you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, if you have any questions or topics that you would like us to cover in this series, please leave them in the comments or shoot us an email at hello@iotforall.com. Other than that, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.